Hello, houseplant lovers, both beginning and advanced. I'm Angelie over here in the Chenard's classroom, coming at you today with a new video about houseplants. Today is going to be an extra long video because we're talking about transplanting. This is a very big topic with lots of ifs, ands, or buts, so buckle in, look down in the description box if you would like to find a more specific part of the video. Otherwise, buckle in and we're going to be talking about transplanting. So why would you want to transplant your houseplants? Well, as they grow, their roots are going to be getting bigger and bigger. They're going to be eating up the soil in their pots. This is going to mean they're going to be lacking nutrients and lacking soil. So they're going to be lacking water and environmental buffers from the world around them. So you're going to want to make sure that your plant has soil at all times. When you're getting in there to transplant, this is a good time to think about the growth of your plant. Some of these houseplants will get extremely tall. Some houses can't support that, so this is a good time to think about if you want this plant to continue growing or if you'd like to kind of take the time to trim those roots and kind of stunt its growth. When you're really getting into that root mass, it's a good time to look at the health of those roots, maybe trim them back, trim the dead ones, and make any adjustments that your soil might need. It's a good time to think about what soil you need. Is it moisture-loving plant? Do you need the well-draining soil? Do you need to add some perlite to help the aeration? Do you need a bigger pot? Remember to think about your root mass size and never adjust the size of your pot more than 2 inches at a time. So, if you're thinking about transplanting, here are some tips to make sure that it's time for your plant. If you're seeing some roots growing out the top of your soil, it's time to transplant. If your pot is extremely firm and you can just tell that there is no soil in between the sides of your plastic pot and the root mass, it's time to repot. If you have giant roots sticking out the bottom of your plant, it's time to repot. During the rest of this video, I'm going to show you a few different examples of the different kind of plants and root masses you're going to encounter when you're doing transplanting. Additionally, I'm going to have Andrea Chenard, our resident orchid expert, show you how to transplant orchids, as well as Simone Marski, our resident water plant and carnivorous plant expert. She's going to show you how to transplant a carnivorous plant.
Alrighty, so today we are repotting a Nepenthes carnivorous plant. I have our pre-made carnivorous plant mix and our Nepenthes. Their mix is essentially just about a 50-50 split of perlite and peat moss. I generally like to use just a tad more peat moss than perlite, just for moisture purposes. So there's more than one reason why you want to pre-wet your peat moss. One is that it tends to shrink a little bit and you don't know really how much you have until it's pretty well moist. And the other reason is that essentially it kind of is hard to wet. It kind of initially repels water, and so you just kind of want to make sure that it's actually taking up all the water so you don't get pockets of just dry peat mix. That's most commonly what happens when you don't pre-wet it. Alrighty, so that is pretty moist for this one. And so now we have our plant. I like to treat the stake and the Nepenthes kind of as one if it's well staked. If it's not, you can always restake it. So this guy has some compacted soil in the bottom. Woo! His root system is not very big. They never are. So basically this is its entire vascular system right here. And there is a little bit of a jiffy pellet attached here, so I'm just going to remove that because I do not like what they do. They kind of just compact the roots there. So yeah, as you can see, you're not really working with a whole lot of soil. So I'm just going to rest that guy there for just a second and kind of just clear out this pot of all the compacted stuff. Alrighty, so add some soil back in here. And some people like to wrap the Nepenthes roots in live sphagnum. I generally don't always think it's necessary, but it does help keep them moist, and it is probably the superior media. One thing to note is you always want to use distilled water. Sometimes water from your pond or water laid out for 48 hours is enough. Although that last one isn't always the best because there's still sometimes minerals in there that don't dissipate. So we're just kind of gonna tuck this guy in here, just kind of like you would normally. Again, treating the plant and the stake kind of just as one unit. Here, give this guy some fresh soil. There's no rule against not using some of the soil you already had. It's just generally when people need to repot, the soil is mossy or compacted or just not ideal for this guy. So he's almost done, and he's got a new fresh look to him. And now you can just kind of water him like normal until it comes out the bottom, and you're all set. Boop.
Hi, welcome. I'm Andrea Chenard, and I'm here to show you how to repot an orchid. This orchid came in to us from a customer, and it definitely had a lot of dying roots in there. So we got all the dead roots out, removed all the old bark. There's going to be a real big chunk that will come out of the bottom of it that was completely dead. I soaked the orchid prior in a little bowl of water so I could see what roots were alive, and you can see that those green roots are the live roots. A little more snipping before we move on to the next task, where we will fill the bottom of the container with a light layer of the orchid bark and some sphagnum moss. The orchid bark I soaked the day before, so it was nice and moist for those roots to grab onto. And the sphagnum moss I threw in about 15 minutes before starting. We also cut off all the old wrinkly leaves. The plant will focus on trying to fill those leaves with water, so it's best to leave as many or remove as many of those leaves as possible, leaving the more firm, newer growth. Next, we tuck it right down in there, making sure most of the roots are stuck in the soil mixture. You want to press down too hard while you're situating it. And next you start sprinkling the orchid bark and the sphagnum moss mixture around those roots, lightly pressing in between the roots so you don't smash them. And you just tuck it in to make sure it's nice and secure in its new home. Now you can see it's all tucked in. You got two roots that didn't want to stay in the soil, but that's okay. The majority of them are in the soil where they will get lots of nice moisture from the bark and sphagnum moss. This blue pot is really great to create humidity for the orchid, so you can always put a light layer of gravel in the bottom with some water. Now you can see 24 hours after repotting how happy this little orchid is. Thanks for watching.
So today we're going to be talking about cactuses as an example of a very painful and difficult plant to transplant. So first off, you're going to want to use the right soil. This cactus mix is great, it's well draining, and it's going to provide some stability for your plant. Additionally, you're going to want to take some protective measures. Use some personal protective equipment. Here I chose a piece of bubble wrap, as it is going to keep the thorns off my skin, but is pliable enough that I can feel those delicate little nodes, so I do not pop them off during transplant. Here you see me busting off all the soil, showing any roots that I can get to bust out. While the root mass is very strong and dry, you're going to want to really get in there and rub up as many roots as you can so they get a head start into growing into the new soil you provide. Here you're going to see me tucking it into its new little pot. I'm really going at it with the compaction. That's because this is an extremely tall plant that is very pokey, so I do not want it to fall over. I want it to maintain that structural integrity, so I'm going to do that by really just compacting it in there. You can see me going in, straightening it up. Don't be afraid to readjust your root mass to keep it straight and beautiful. Here I am, topping it off with its top coat, really making it look gorgeous. Finally, you're going to want to really just water that plant in. Even your cactuses are going to want to be watered in. This way, it'll be happy in its new place. We chose this Ficus Audrey today as a beautiful example as a pot distraction. So, as you can tell, she definitely needs a repot as she is overrooted. She's growing out the top as well as has multiple roots growing out the bottom. She's ready. She needs her new soil, and she needs it bad, very clearly. So, at first glance, this is going to be a simple, easy transplant. However, I completely needed to destroy this pot. I needed to bust out the scissors and break her out because she was very fully well-rooted in the bottom of the pot. There was no getting her out. And you might see this with your plants at home, as they are all prolific growers. So you might see them become very well rooted in your ceramic pots even. You might need to either bust out a knife and start cutting the roots around the edges of the pots to try to loosen it up, or you might need to just bust out the hammer and really go at it. Be careful if you do that. Always wear your protective gear. But also, second glance at this plant, you can tell the root mass isn't as big as we initially thought. She just had those giant tap roots. Because of this, we're not going to increase the size of her pot. We're actually even going to plant her in a smaller pot with our regular potting soil here. So we just got our regular size pot, just about the same size that we took her out of. We're going to compact some soil in the bottom to give her something to work through before she pokes out again. You can clearly see that that root mass fits in there very well. There's lots of room for plenty of soil. We're going to try to move her roots around so that they are all covered in soil and there is no root touching the pot. This way she'll have plenty of room to grow, water her in, and she'll be happy in her new home. Look at that gorgeous plant. So today we're using this Hoya as an example of extremely dry soil, which is something you're going to run into when you're transplanting. Before transplanting, I would recommend watering it and make sure your plants are thoroughly watered. While this may create some mud pie you have to deal with, it's better than just breaking off hunks of soil that include pieces of root. Bottom watering a plant and allowing that root mass to fully moisturize is going to make it a little easier on yourself for really just getting in there to separate the soil from the roots to get your new, fresh stuff. So here you see me bottom watering, trying to get her hydrated. Well, also, I didn't have the patience to let that go, so I am just trying to really work away what I can, what soil I can away from the root mass to get it transplanted. Here you can see that the root mass on this Hoya is actually very small, very thin. It's not going to take a deep pot to retransplant. So I'm really trying to work up at least a few roots that can really reach down into the new soil to kind of help itself break up that tight root mass. So here you can see me just slowly, I'm just going so slow because I don't want to lose any of that root mass from this Hoya. Hoyas are such slow growers that you're going to want to keep what root mass that you do have. So I would err on the safe side. If you think you're going to be ripping up your roots, just keep it in a little block as you can. Here you can see that we had to keep a small block. Right now you can see me amending our potting soil with some perlite to help increase the drainage, because Hoyas, they love well-draining soil. And while this Hoya does not have a real deep root system, I really want to make sure that the soil is extremely well draining to prevent any sort of root rot or negative bacteria forming in the bottom of the pot. Still needed more soil because the root mass is so small. You're going to tuck her in with that soil the best you can around the edges. While I couldn't break up the root mass that much, she's really going to appreciate the new soil that I can give her, as well as that perlite mixture for the well draining in the bottom of the pot. This is really going to increase the health and virility of the plant. I'm really just compacting around the edges, trying to get it in the sides and underneath of that root brick that I know is still in there. I'm tapping the sides to help with compaction as well. Tap, tap, tap. And then, you know what? I'm watering her in till you see her run out the bottom. I ran out of water at that point. Get more water. Make sure she runs out the bottom. You want her to be really well watered in, so that she'll be happy in her new home. We chose this beautiful black Raven ZZ as a beautiful example for propagation by division, as well as repotting into the same or, even smaller pots, as well as, just a great candidate for compaction. So here you'll see it has no stability. They are wrapped together to keep upright. You can see the roots growing up over the top. You can see the brain, lots of foreign organic material. As you can see here, I'm just pulling off these dead bits. You don't want to keep those in. As you're transplanting, it's a great time to make sure to get those out of there. This one is really easy to bear root. The soil just basically just falls right off, which is a really good indicator that the soil it was in was really good, well-draining soil, which is good for them. So here you can see there are two brains. We got one there, one here. So these are very clearly two different plants that could be potted up in two different pots. But instead of doing that today, we're going to pot them up in the same size pot that it was in, the 6-inch here. We're going to cut them apart because we want them to maintain their structural stability. We don't want them to be dependent on each other. So we're going to fix that here with this transplanting. Just go ahead and remove that. First off, you're going to want to visually plan a little bit. You're going to want to put a little bit of that soil in the bottom of there. For ZZs, I would highly recommend using the palm, citrus, and cactus mix potting soil right here. It's very well draining stuff. Can compact to hold these ZZs upright. They'll be very happy with that. You're going to want to very lightly cover the bottom of the pot so that your roots are not touching plastic. You're going to want to set them in, see how they look. You want them touching, not touching too much. You want soil to be able to go in between the roots. I really like how it looked, so I just decided to go with it and started tucking it in with some cactus soil. I made sure to really go at it with the compaction so that they can create this new structural stability and stand up on their own. And just, it makes them so much more aesthetically pleasing at the end. So you can see me here, just compact, 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 push down on the sides, push down in the middle. You want it in between the roots as well as the sides. And look how beautiful she looks, all standing up all on her own. She feels so much more happy and healthy. She's going to really appreciate the fact that I just gave her a much more stable home. Really compact that in there. Look at it. I can even tap it up, and she stays up. She's a little wibbly wobbly like normal, but look at her stand up. And just like with every other plant, you're going to want to really just water her in so that she'll be happy in her new home. Cut off any extra material there. You don't want that. This just creates home for pests and diseases. And yeah, with any other plant, you're really going to want to water her in. ZZs don't like a whole lot of water, but with this initial planting, it's a good idea. Just don't water her for a good amount of time, and she'll be okay. This is really going to help that soil compact and going to make sure all the roots are touching soil and all have a chance to really absorb that moisture from the soil and the nutrients as well. I hope you enjoyed our video about transplanting. Thank you for joining me, Andrea, and Simone on our transplanting journey, and we'll see you next time.